Hey, here I am, larger than life, in front of the Technology Center here at Eastern Arizona College. And today we're going to take a look at, very quickly, this is not going to be a long video, at operating systems, hardware, firmware, software, all of these wares, and what's going on with them. What I have found in reading, lots of textbooks for classes and looking at tons of websites for classes, um, that there's some simplistic information that I think is really good for people to understand and know, that they kind of just hope that you get. So what I mean is that you're reading all this stuff about computers and how they work and all the components, but they don't say it this simply and this directly as I'm going to do. They give you all these components, all these parts and things, and they're kind of hoping that you put that all together in your head. And so first off, there are different ways to describe the operating system. You need to know that. You go into this field and you're going to find out that, when you start talking about a particular topic in computers and the operating system, it's, well, how are you viewing it? Are you viewing it as a programmer, which is a lot more of what we're seeing here on the screen? So there's the application, programs, utilities, and then here's the operating system sitting on the computer hardware. Or are you viewing it in a way of, what does the operating system do? And we do this in 113. We take a look at all these different things that the operating system does. That's not what we're looking at today either. What we're looking at is this. These layers are how any computer works. And so I want you to broaden your mind. When I mean computer, I mean the computer that you're viewing this on. I mean a phone that you might be viewing it on, a tablet. I also mean this is just memory, right? This has got a USB-C plug on the end of it. And this is a storage device. This is an SSD, really fast one actually, which is fantastic. But there's a computer in here too, right? There's chips that allow the data to flow from this cable in and out. And there's this computer chips that are controlling that flow, right? And so think about it in much more that way. The fact that you're watching your smart TV, there's a computer in there and it's doing specific things. It doesn't allow you to do everything that you want on a computer that's specifically designed, but nonetheless, it is still a computer. So let's take a look here. Right at the top, there's our operating systems, and I'll give you some examples there that you can look at. Lots of operating systems out there. Then there's a hardware abstraction layer. Now, that hardware abstraction layer, where we really see it, is in the drivers, right? That's the software, the programming that interacts with the hardware. So you go out and get yourself a new graphics card and you plug that graphics card into your computer. When the computer starts up, it's going to go, whoa, I got a new graphics card here and I need to know how to deal with that appropriately so I don't cause any problems and so I can use it the most efficient way possible. And then you load the drivers on that are specific for that. And we have drivers for printers, we have drivers for these. Just because you don't have to load the driver in doesn't mean that Windows doesn't have a driver. As a matter of fact, you should look at any piece of hardware. Any hardware that's out there has to have a driver, and that's part of this hardware abstraction, meaning that we're kind of removing what is happening on that hardware, and we have this layer of software that deals with it directly. And because it's particular, we call those drivers, right? They drive the hardware. And then below that, we have firmware, and then we have the hardware. So let's look at what the hardware is. Hardware is the silicone. It's the processor. It's the USB drive or controller. It's whatever, right? It's the RAM. It's the system buses. It's the physical stuff. Well, in order to use that hardware, you have to use software to make that happen. But we don't call this particular type of software software. We call it firmware. And that name came about a long time ago because you basically use a particular method to put the code, not code it, but put the code right into the hardware. And so when you think of that graphics card that you got and you're going to upgrade your system and punch that graphics card in there and get it running, there's all those chips on there, right? There's all that silicone in there doing stuff. And for every little piece of silicone that's in there, every processor that you have some software on it that does something specific. Maybe it controls the bus, the graphics bus, to the RAM or to the memory that's on the card. Tons of things that it does. And so every one of those little chips has got this firmware burnt into it. And again, my example here, this has got firmware burnt in there. We call it burning it in because one of the methods a long time ago was similar to that. You wouldn't burn it, but we call it burning it in because it's more permanent. You just can't take it out, right? I can't say, for instance, on this is a USB 3.1 interface. Oh, I need this to be 3.2. I want this to be 3.2. So let me plug this in and upgrade my firmware. It has no mechanism for that. I can't change the software that's on these chips. What I'd have to do is open this up, take the SSD that I've got in there out. It's an M2 card, and put it in a whole nother board, basically a little mini board that would have the 3.2 capacity on it. That's what I'd have to do. And why would I have to do that? Because there's no way to deal with the software that's been burnt into that. Phones don't have that, right? You can upgrade the OS when you want to on your phone. However, there is a firmware installed in that you can't update. And that firmware is actually helping the phone understand how does it receive an update? How does that happen? Firmware does a lot. But basically what it means is that there's software encoded on those portions of your hardware, and it doesn't come out. It's not easy to change. Now, there is a firmware that we can change, and that's part of what we know now as a UEFI. So over here on the side here. So UEFI is what that's called now. BIOS is the old term, basic input output systems. And we'll get into the UEFI more. And the CMOS settings. All those things are in there together. And so there is portions of the firmware that you can change through flashing the BIOS is usually what they call it, or flashing the UEFI. And that's the low-level code that is dealing directly with those pieces of hardware. And in a computer system, these settings, these UEFI settings, are what gets reported in Windows. So understanding these layers is really just conceptually important, because as you learn all these different facts, and you already know that, as you go through all these different facts, it's a lot of stuff. And you can really kind of get lost in what's talking to what and how it's talking. And so, kind of remember this in your head, that you do have the hardware you can physically put your hands on, but inside that hardware is firmware, is software that's been encoded into those chips to do whatever specific things they're meant to do. Then you have this hardware abstraction layer where these drivers are dealing with that hardware. And if the hardware is acting appropriately, there won't be any crashes or anything like that. If you have some kind of problem with the hardware itself, like it got shocked or something, then these drivers don't interact with it appropriately, and it can cause crashes. And then on top of that, you finally have the operating system. And I could have added one more layer up there, but we're just talking about the hardware and the OS. So we're only going from here to there. But above that would be your applications, the things that you're using, like Chrome or Internet Explorer. No, it's called Edge now, based on Chromium. In any case, that's the basics of dealing with hardware and software and firmware and where that fits in. I'll be doing other presentations that get much more into the CMOS settings, but I wanted you to be able to see that. And again, if you have questions, anything that you want to know about further, let me know, because I can always create one of these videos, of course, with chat in class or whatever. However I need to get the word to you. Oh, my head is, what is wrong? Anyway, it's good to see you guys, or at least have you see me. I don't know, something. Take care, and if you got questions, contact me.